racism, economic injustice. Maybe it goes as far as ethnic cleansing. So that's one response to the other. A second response is what you would call tolerance. That means basically that I have to put up with you. I'd rather not be around you. Being around you makes me uncomfortable, but I have no choice. That really is a form of veiled indifference. At some level, feeling tolerated feels disrespectful. I know that tolerance is kind of a popular buzzword today, but I have to say to people of faith, tolerance is not the standard of the sacred text. It is simply, shall we say, the lowest common denominator of human civility. The standard of the sacred text, which is the third response, might be called unconditional love. In the Christian tradition, Jesus used the word agape or agape. In the Buddhist tradition, the word karuna of compassion, loving kindness, metta. These are expressions of that unconditional love, of reaching into the world of the other. It's saying, you and I are different. Our worlds are different. You make me uncomfortable. I'm willing to live with that level of discomfort and try to understand and reach into your world. That's unconditional love. That goes beyond tolerance.
We are all created in the image and likeness of God. Therefore, my task, especially in conflict, is to try to surface the elements of the divine in my opponent and to acknowledge that presence of the divine and act accordingly. We may disagree substantially on an issue, but I must, because you are created in the image of God, just as I am created in the image of God, we have to have that mutual respect there for that image of the divine in us.
Never consider another human being to be in any way, form, or shape less than you. So that it's a natural human tendency to belittle or dehumanize other. But the moment, again, I'll go back to the term that I earlier used, the concept of taqwa, God consciousness. As long as you always keep God in mind as the benchmark of all your interactions, then you are mindful and cautious of your interaction with the other. So even if you were to do wrong to me, and I am God conscious, my reaction would comply with that God consciousness. And that belittling, that dehumanizing, not valuing the other will be in check.
We all reflect God's likeness, and we all deserve the same humanity, respect, love, care, and concern as one another, despite our many differences of race, culture, ethnicity, and religious affiliation.
And I think most religions would, whether they accept the book of Genesis or not, would accept the premise that there's an element of the divine in each person.
There are like 8 facets or 8 core values that you need them all together to describe faith-based reconciliation. Those include pluralism, inclusion, peacemaking, social justice, forgiveness, healing, the sovereignty of God, and atonement with God. And these have to be held in tension. We were leading a faith-based reconciliation seminar on the Pakistani side of Kashmir called Azad Kashmir. And initially people would say, well, why do we need reconciliation here? We all think alike. But one of the things that we discovered was that these were young people, and these were young people from leading families. They all held a worldview that violence was not only appropriate, but it was a necessary part of the struggle for Kashmiri self-determination. And so in their mind, violence was normal, it was acceptable, it was necessary. And they didn't see how that worldview needed to be transformed. In our work of faith-based reconciliation and diplomacy, part of that includes what we call a service of reconciliation. And typically we gather people into kind of a circle, and it's toward the end of the time that we've been together. So it provides a context for people to speak words of healing to one another. And we never quite know what's going to happen. Sometimes people may need to stand up and offer apology. Sometimes people may need to forgive. Sometimes people will go as individuals to another individual in the circle. Sometimes people will stand up and say something on behalf of a particular identity group. And one of the exercises that we actually do with people is we have them in their small groups actually look at what core values they have and define what would be the top 5 core values that they would hold most deeply. We then ask them to, as a group, to come up with common core values. In a recent faith-based reconciliation dialogue in Syria that involved Syrian Muslims and American Christians, we started in a tremendous atmosphere of hostility because the Syrian and U.S. governments have a very hostile relationship at the present time. But it was, I think, a profound insight for people when they discovered Syrian Muslims and American Christians had very similar core values. Underneath all the surface, the tension, the conflict, they realized that they held core values in common. During a bridge building meeting that we were doing in Kathmandu, Nepal, we had Kashmiri Muslims from the Pakistan side sitting with Kashmiri Hindu Pandits from the Indian side. And it was predictably tense at the beginning. But toward the end of our time together there, we had a service of reconciliation. And one of the things that we had them do is we had the Kashmiris from the Indian side line up on one side of the room, and the Kashmiris from the Pakistani side line up on the other. We said, now we want you to walk slowly toward each other. And imagine that the line of control, the border, is in the middle of the room. And we want you to meet at that line of control. And as they came together, they stood and looked at each other, and then they began embracing. And people began weeping in tears. And I said, let this be a symbol, a prophetic symbol of hope of what can one day happen. Let this give you hope that what you're doing is not in vain. And at the end of the day, people in conflict need hope. And hope often evolves out of powerful symbols like this.
We have many legends and stories about Aaron trying to reconcile individuals and tribes and people who were fighting with one another. So we have a great example right in the Jewish tradition, all the way back to the Torah, of someone who is this model of a voice of moderation and peace and reconciliation, and actively works, and it is difficult work, actively works to bring reconciliation and peace.
The Islamic tradition is the moment you begin to belittle or demonize other, you are in fact demonizing or belittling yourself.
Humility is acknowledging oneself not as I see myself, but as God sees myself. And if each of us were to do that, then think of the effect it would have on negotiations. Think of what the effect it would have on relations of one person to another, one people with another, one religion with another. Yeah. But too often I think we think of humility as just being groveling or just being something quite negative. Actually, it's a very positive virtue because it allows us the opportunity to view ourselves as God sees us.
Anyone involved as a person of faith has to come in with an attitude of humility. And you have to realize that you are a small part of the picture. You have to be able and willing to honor the work that others are doing as well and represent that what you're doing is not the whole solution of the situation, but it is an important part of the solution. I'm involved in the leadership of another project in the Middle East, which has been based in Syria. And as a person of faith, it causes you to come